Tim, it's a spicy title. It's a spicy title.
It's pretty good.
Do we really think? It doesn't actually, you know what? It doesn't even matter what we think. Does Aston Martin really think beating Red Bull in 2024 is achievable?
Yes, they do. Because that's what Dan Fallows, technical director at Aston Martin, said to me on Sunday during our media call with him. Yeah, man, he thinks Red Bull's beatable, and you know what? He kind of convinced me too.
All right. Because here's what I got to know. Because listen, we all want more winners this year. We all want it, but we all know that Red Bull had such an unbelievable car. It's going to be tough to catch them. Tell me how you react as a reporter when you hear that answer on a press conference call. Like, do you not go? Does it not shock you a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, you're not expecting a team or a person from a team to shoot out of a gun like that, saying a statement like that. So when Dan said that to me, I was I was on a Zoom call with I don't know, there's probably about 60 of us on this thing. And I was trying not to make a face because I was trying to be professional here, which, I struggle at doing sometimes. Mm-hmm. But as soon as he said it, I was kind of covering my mouth oh, dang. All right, here we go. This is good. It was interesting because that kind of set the tone for all of our interviews with the drivers and team officials throughout the rest of the day. So it was good. It was a good little nugget that he kind of threw at us. But he, obviously a very confident guy because of working with Adrian Newey for as long as he did, because Dan Fallows is originally from that Red Bull program. Yeah. Originally, working underneath Adrian Newey. So, he's the greatest engineer in Formula One history, in my opinion. So for Dan, he's a very talented guy. So he knows what he's talking about. And he's the one who really turned that program around at Aston Martin. He gave them a car for last season.
They were the surprise of the year last year, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. If you go back and you look at 2022 and how much they struggled in 2022 and where they finished, and then coming back in 2023 and really being the talk of the grid at the start of the season. I mean, obviously Red Bull was as well because they were so competitive, but Aston Martin's jump was spectacular because of the stable platform that Dan and his team at Aston Martin created for them. So I can see why he's confident and bullish on their project for this year. I mean, literally, it's just an evolution of last year's car, and they were already happy with last year's car and the platform that they had made. So they had good bones to kind of build upon coming into 2024.
But one thing they probably couldn't be as happy with last year was the upgrades mid-season. It seemed like they were truly great, truly one of the top teams until they started putting upgrades on the car, and then the car started to slow down. And if I'm not correct, they had trouble in corners, especially after that. Am I wrong about that? Where was the major hiccup once we got to places like Spa?
Yeah, it was straight line speed was a big issue for sure.
Completely the opposite of corners. Okay.
Yeah, but you're right though, Adam. I mean, they did suffer a lot of cornering problems as well in the mid season, and once they got to the tail end of the season, so Austin, if I remember this correctly, it was Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, Abu Dhabi. Those were kind of them getting back on the right track. So essentially, what ended up happening was they brought a big upgrade to Canada, and I believe that was around round seventh race of the season, if I remember correctly. It was in June, and they thought that what they had brought to the car was going to work, and they were pretty confident in it. So they kind of kept going down that trajectory. So instead of going down a road where the driver can drive the car, feel comfortable, feel confident, and get the lap time, they went down a road where they were chasing performance, which you should do, as any Formula One team should do. But at the same time, if that's going to sacrifice, your driver's confidence, what they can do, then that's going to hurt the team. And so it really affected Lance at the beginning, and then it came and got Fernando as well. So eventually it affected both of their drivers, just at different times and in different ways. The thing for Fernando is that, I mean, like Adam, he's a 2-time F1 world champion. He's, in my opinion, one of the most talented drivers on the grid, and probably one of the most naturally talented racing drivers ever. Like, he can make anything fast. For him, it was kind of understanding and not understanding what he's doing to make the car go fast, because he's just naturally gifted at making something go quickly. Mm-hmm. But when things start to go really wrong, then it obviously is going to affect him as well. And so that's essentially what happened. And then once they got to Austin, really started to experiment with the car, different setups, different floors. I remember they took some grid penalties and pit lane penalties so they could sort that out, changing the floor, changing so many different types of components in the car, and eventually started figuring it out. And they finally figured that, hey, we got a good platform, and it kind of seemed like they were chasing too much of performance and not enough drivability, like making the car drivable, making the driver confident, comfortable. And so that's essentially how they kind of got off track. And so if you're spending all that time going off track, you've got to come back. So I wonder how much that will affect them for 2024. They seem pretty confident though, man. Like I mean, for the most part, like, you know, Mike Crack seemed pretty confident too. Like, they were a confident group yesterday, Adam.
They weren't tempering expectations. Obviously, we got our first look at the car this morning. It looks great. The only real difference really is that it says Aramco on the side rather than Cognizant, which has been moved to another part of the car, you know, different sponsorship dollars. And Aramco, I think, is a major stakeholder in the team now. But you know, in terms of how team principals and drivers approach these things, like if you talk to somebody probably, and I'm speculating here, but if you talk to Haas, like, they were saying, yeah, we expect to be last. If you talk to somebody at Alpine, they're like, well, we hope. Are you getting the sense that Aston Martin's like, no, for sure, we're going to be great?
Yeah, no, I get that feeling. Like, I mean, the only one to have like a big statement was Dan when he said that to me. But, you know, Lance was pretty confident in seeing that they could fight like for possible podiums, and same with Fernando. He seemed very confident. I asked Fernando actually about the sim, like his sim sessions, because it was, you know, one of the things I'm starting to learn is that with the new sims, they're able to kind of transfer the data from what they're building, so the newer cars, over into the simulator to see how it affects the driving of it, which is wild if you think about that cool for a second.
Yeah.
Because they don't actually have any on-track data from the thing. Like, it's literally like, okay, this is what our computer is saying. Let's plug it into this computer and go drive it, which is friggin' wild, man. He had said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially it feels, he notices a bit more of a change. He said he didn't get to drive it as much as he wanted to, and he was going to be doing that this week. Not only on track during like a filming session, but in the sim is essentially what he was saying. He was going to be able to drive the newer components more later this week. And so he was looking forward to that. But just the overall confidence, they didn't come in downbeat at all. Everybody had their head held really high. I mean, and sometimes with Formula One teams, Adam, like, you know, like teams will come out and say like, hey, it's going to be a bit of a struggle for us starting off, like i.e. McLaren last year. Like, I remember sitting on that press conference, and Zach and Andrea Stella just, you know, they had their heads in their hands. And so
what was the headline? It was like deadlines were missed, and you go, oh no.
Yeah, it was. It was bad, man. They were you flat out, like, I think it was like Zach, again paraphrasing, but Zach was kind of like, yeah, it's going to be a struggle. Like, the start of this, we're not going to be good at the start of the season, kind of thing. And so teams, you know, for the most part are pretty, you know, they're pretty truthful when it comes to that. Like, they'll tell you and where they kind of see themselves. But Aston Martin was like, man, they came out swinging. I was like, all right, I'm here for this. Let's go.
Well,
let's do this.
I got to tell you, because of your insights, and I watched a lot of, you know, one of the things is I've gotten more and more into the sport, and thank goodness for the F1 accessibility. Like, you can watch everything all the time, things that aren't even aired on, say, TSN or Sky Sports or whatever. Is like you watching 3 hours of testing in Bahrain, right? And when they have those big pieces, I don't even know what they're called that they put on the cars, right?
Aero rakes.
Aero rigs, yeah. And watching the Aston Martins last year, and you're like, listen, man. And I know you're going in a couple weeks, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave it on Sunday, actually. This Sunday.
Sunday?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
this coming Sunday.
Oh, man, we are so close. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
So, but what's so cool about that is you're like, listen, Aston Martin's going to be a sleeper. So I doubled down on Fernando and Lance in my grid rival pool and just shot right to the top. It was great. Like, they carried me. Now, Fernando came in last year, obviously new team that nobody expected to be that good. And then and also had lost weight. And had gained a ton of confidence. And by race, I think it was 4 or 5, he was saying, guys, this is the best car I've ever driven. And obviously, if that's the case, Fernando's driven a lot of cars. Mm-hmm. And I know he was in a state of ecstasy. He was making regular podiums again. Like, life is good. Mm-hmm. But he also doesn't have to say something like that. And if that is the bone structure, it seems like if they're able to manipulate a few things, he could feel that way again this year. Do you get the sense that he feels that way about it?
I think so. It does seem like it. I mean, talking to him yesterday, he just, it's funny. Like the main thing he just kept talking about, and I said this before we hit record, was the fact that he was there was 3 world champions on the grid, and he was one of them that didn't have a contract for 2025.
He brought that up
several times, but not in like, but basically, he's awesome, but not in like a bad way. It was kind of more along the lines of like, hey, Aston Martin, you know what you've got. Let's start talking about a new contract here.
Because when he was
something like along those lines is what it felt like.
When he did it with Alpine, it was like you better sign me, and what you're offering me is crap, right? Like, you've offered me something and I hate it.
Yeah, he wasn't happy with that. Yeah.
Do you get the sense that like, because obviously everybody's talking about Mercedes, right? That Mercedes seat, Mercedes seat.
Yeah, that was everything.
That he wants to stay at Aston Martin.
Yeah, I do. He kept referring that it was a place that he was comfortable. It was a place that he wanted to be at. It was a project that he really wanted to see through, and that is something. And I've spoken with Fernando for many years, but this was one of those times where it's like, yeah, I really believe him. Like, I believe that he actually does really want to see this thing through. And I think for him, I think he sees like a ton of potential in where the team could go. Not only for this season, but for next season as well. Because for him, it's kind of like, what's the runway? Like, what's the length that he's got left in him? Like, and it was funny. Like, one of the journalists on the call asked him, like, are you going to do this until you're like 50? And he's like laughing. He's like, no. He's like, I'm not going to make it that long. Like, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be racing F1 until I'm 50. But like, I am trying to extend it as much as I can, essentially, is what he said. So I think he understands the impact that Lewis going to Ferrari has. He was asked a lot about Lewis actually in the thing, and eventually he's like, look, I don't care about Lewis Hamilton. That's literally what he said. He's like, I'm focused on what I'm doing here.
I did read a funny quote that said, and it's so Fernando, where it was like, he said, he said up until last year, finishing at Mercedes was his dream team, and he's like, all of a sudden Ferrari is, or something like that.
Yeah, he said that on the call. Yeah, he said that on the call. He did say that.
He's such a good heel. Like, he's so good. He's such a good villain. But in the most you root for this guy. He's the best. He's the best.
He's great, man. I think also, like you had mentioned last year, coming in thinner and fitter. And, getting older, I mean, that's harder to do, man. Trust me. I know, like, I'm in that position right now. I'm like, I'm like struggling with like trying to lose weight, get fitter or whatever. And I'm like, in my 40s. So it's definitely a challenge. And for him, he had mentioned that he had turned around his nutrition. Like, that was one of the things that him and his team focused on in the off season was nutrition. So we got a nutritionist. Nutritionist came in, and I asked him like, what's changed, like, in terms of your nutrition, like why do it? And, essentially he's not fully vegan, but he's eating way more greens than he's kind of ever have. And a big thing for him is finding that endurance and finding ways of recovering faster, something similar to like, remember when Tom Brady did it?
Oh,
just
yeah.
Just to extend.
Did you ever read the Tom Brady book on nutrition?
No, never.
Oh man, Tim, it's a wild journey. Like in it he classifies 4 different types of water. And
like alkaline and like reverse osmosis type stuff.
Yes, and then he talks about how he like will never have a mushroom or a tomato because they're inflammatory. Like then he never eats a burger. He's like, I know what a burger tastes like. I know it tastes good, but I'm trying to be an athlete here. And we all say that, and then a burger comes across your desk, and you're like, damn, I got to eat that. And these guys are the ones. The reason they they're all so talented, but also it's like up here, it's that drive. Like, no, I'm not going to have that. I much rather have this leafy green salad.
Yes, and that's essentially what he's got to do. He's got to greens was a big thing for him. And again, it's sort of, similar to, because I was thinking about Tom Brady when he was like explaining why he was doing what he was doing to me. I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. Recovering faster, extend your endurance because the season is so long. And I think for him, it kind of seems like that he could be a bit worried at that length of the season. It's 24 races. It's a long calendar. It goes in from March until December. Well, actually, February until December if you, consider everything else that he's got to do. And I think for him, it's just trying to make sure he stays healthy, fit at a certain weight, strong, and he's able to kind of carry that energy through the entire season. Because I think, like, as you get older, traveling to all these different destinations, the time change, it all affects you. Like it really just hits you like a hammer in the face. Like when you get to some of these places.
Oh yeah, well, it's not like Formula One makes it easy. They're like, we're going to go to Europe, and then we might go down to Southeast Asia, and then we're going to go up to China, North America for a second. And
then we're going to go to Australia, then we're going to come back over here.
Like they don't do it regionally, which they could, but they don't. So I guess with that, Tim, like with Fernando, you're going to Bahrain at the end of the week, right?
Yes.
That is almost a complete 180 in terms of schedule. I remember I was in Abu Dhabi and Dubai for about 2 weeks when I was like 21, and I couldn't get out of bed till noon their time, right? Because it took so long. How long does it take you, average person, to switch to the Bahrain daytime schedule?
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely a struggle for me.
Okay.
I've been like, texting with one of the trainers who's in F1. And just kind of asking questions about, hey, like, what do you suggest I do going from Eastern Standard Time, crossing like 3 different time zones, and going into a completely different one? And a big part of it is trying to like get onto their schedule. So
like before you leave?
Before you leave. So like 2 days before, you want to try and start waking up like a couple hours earlier than you normally wake up. So I wake up early regardless. And so it's trying to like dial that back, avoid caffeine for like the last 2 days before you fly. And then when you're flying, it's staying on their schedule. So if it's nighttime, it's around like your bedtime, that's the time you got to go to sleep. So you got to make sure you're not getting any like light in your eyes, like light from the sun. So you got to shut the shades, turn the lights off, whatever you got to do, and go to sleep. And then my travel is difficult because I fly into Dubai at like midnight their time. Mm-hmm. And then I got to fly I got a 4-hour layover. And then I've got to fly out of Dubai at midnight to Bahrain. And I get into Bahrain at 1 a.m. their time. Oh. And so it's like, I don't know if I'm going to understand what I need to do at that moment. Like, can I check into my hotel? Like, can I get it? Like, what am I going to do?
You're not due at the track that day, are you?
No, thankfully, like I'm not till the next day.
Okay.
But I still have to get credentialed and everything. But so it's definitely going to be a process. And I'm thinking like, like I'm not the only one who has to deal with this. Like there are other people in F1 who have to deal with this like 24 times throughout the year.
And in Fernando's case, he's driving the car.
Mm-hmm.
And so lengthening that career and lengthening his ability, because it comes down to little things. Like I think people don't think about it when you're watching because you're just watching guys drive cars, but you don't realize like the effort it takes in your neck and in your arms and
your whole body.
being sore all the time, how that grades on you, right?
Oh yeah, man. Like your organs are literally shifting. Like you're, as strong as you are, these guys are, like the organs are still going to like start shifting. Like they're absorbing like 6 Gs is like peak, maybe even higher in some corners. Like, so it's a lot on the body. I mean, it's good that they're young, but for the older drivers, it starts to become a little more challenging because you can't recover, you can't bounce back fast enough. And so I think for Fernando, it's him. And he had mentioned like the triple headers. So the races that there are back to back to back.
Oh yeah.
Is trying to like get in and then get out of these countries as quick as possible so he can then try to adapt to the next time zone. So not really waiting around in the country that he's racing in once the race is finished. It's kind of like once the race is finished, I've got to get out of here and get to the next time zone so I can quickly adjust as quickly as possible. And I think for the younger drivers, it may not be as challenging to do that because they are younger. So he's got an interesting year ahead, and I'm excited to see his story kind of play out at him.
Lance Armstrong is the guy.
Stroll.
Lance Armstrong. Why did I say Lance Armstrong? It's early. I'm not even on my own time.
It is actually pretty early. Ridiculous.
Lance Stroll took a lot of crap last year, and people forget. It's funny. Like zero. They have zero sympathy for this guy who broke both of his wrists. I don't know if you know what it's like to drive a car, but it's difficult when your wrists are broken. And he was able to make it for the first race. He was able to finish 8th, if I got it right. 7th or 8th, something like that. It was a really great finish that I don't think got a lot of the headlines because Fernando was in 3rd, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, how did that happen?" And Tim, I think what's interesting about Lance's season last year is he had some real bright spots, and then there were some spots where it was like people really got on him, and I think he probably got on himself, and there were some confidence issues, perhaps. What do you sense from Lance Armstrong going into
Stroll?
Oh my gosh! What do you say? I don't care what you sense from Lance Armstrong. I really care about Lance Stroll. Actually, what do you sense from Lance going into the season and how he's feeling, knowing that stable partnership, he and Fernando get along great. And B, they got a great car.
Yeah. Well, so Stroll finished 10th in 2023. So last season, I think he had like 74 points in total. And I think he wants to just try and build off of that. And I think the biggest thing for him is to just keep up with Fernando. Like I mean, you're not always going to beat Fernando Alonso. It's Fernando Alonso, and the guy last year was at the top of his game. I mean, they're hoping for the same from Fernando. They're hoping for that same type of quality driver, and you got to learn. Like, you just have to learn from him. Like, he has so much information to give, and I mean, obviously, he's probably not going to give everything away, right? Like, he is still at the end of the day a competitor, so there is going to be things that you're not going to get out of him, but I think for Lance, like sounds like he had a pretty good off season. He was up in Western Canada skiing for some of it, and then started heavy training. Like he's been training extremely hard over the past 5-6 weeks. Has had put in a big training camp block. And I think for one of the things I think is that he just needs to keep driving. Like, he needs to keep racing. He needs to keep driving different things in the off season to keep the skills sharp, to keep on top of different changes to a car, because that's the thing with an F1 car, right? It's not always going to be the same. It's not always going to feel the same because you're putting new parts on it. So the car is kind of always an evolution of itself. And you're hoping that evolution is giving you more confidence and the car is getting better, but at the same time, sometimes it can go in the opposite direction like it did for them last year. And now you're that's where you lose your confidence and frustration sets in, and it just kind of snowballs. I think also for last season for Lance, like he had a lot of hard luck. I mean, there were some races where he was in a good position and something would take him out. Same with qualifying. I mean, Monaco, he was actually quite quick until Q2, or a piece of Norris's car damaged the floor on his car, and that put him out. Lance, it put him out of qualifying because of that, and that wasn't a good result because Fernando was so competitive in Monaco, and so
it's impossible
there were
to
things
pass in Monaco.
Yeah, you can't pass. So qualifying is crucial, right? So anyways, regardless of all that, I mean, he needs to have a good, strong season, needs to be consistent for sure, and just keep learning from Alonso as much as you can. I think if you like the last I want to say the last 4 races. So I would say Austin, that run of Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, Abu Dhabi. There were some standout performances from him personally through that season, I think. Austin was a decent run for him. Mexico was decent. Brazil was really good. Vegas was really good. And so it's just trying to build off of that and keep that confidence and carry it into the next season. That, I think, is going to be crucial for him to start with.
Okay. All right. And Lance is not the most talkative guy. Like, he's not, at least with the media. Do you get the sense that he's content going into this season, that he's ready, that he's confident?
Yeah, he seems like it. It's different for, like, I have a good relationship with him, so it's, he's good to talk to with me, and so I always have a good chat with him. He seems confident, which is good, and I can always tell when, like, he's not in a good mood. Because he kind of wears his heart on his sleeve that way, which I respect. So I can tell, because I've known him for long enough.
Yeah,
I can tell when I think he knows it's going to be something that's going to be good that's coming, and I think he's in for a decent. I think he's in for a decent season. Now we just need to see what the other teams are going to do.
Right.
Right. So.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to give full marks to 2 teams so far: Aston Martin and Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, VCARB, because both of them have paint on their car. It's crazy. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Fully painted cars, and Aston Martin looks like it should. Beautiful, British racing green. Gotta love it.
You want to see the car?
Yeah, let's bring it up
here. Yeah. All right. I'm a sucker for I'm a huge sucker for Aston Martin, just because of this car. And let me know if you can see that. For those listening, we are taking a look at the AMR24. For some reason, it's taking forever to load, so hopefully that kicks in eventually.
Well, I mean, obviously, are we seeing, Tim, the real car?
There it
here?
is.
Like it's on screen. So that's what the real car looks like.
Yeah, so not like other teams that you and I have seen, where they don't really show their full car.
Yeah.
We haven't seen many full cars, like Alpine, we saw them. The VCARB car, we saw that was a full reveal. This is a full reveal as well, and it looks like it's got a part of the floor on it too, which is actually kind of exciting to see.
Yeah.
I think like one of the, and this is like really technical, and I won't go too far into detail with it, but it's it's sort of the front suspension. It's like the pull rod, push rod sort of theory. And for Aston Martin, they're kind of sticking with their push rod theory with the front suspension. I don't know if you can see the cursor or not, but essentially there's a V shape that's above the tire, and then there's an arm that goes down the middle of it. That arm that goes down the middle of it, that's where you're going to get that pull rod, push rod suspension theory. And essentially it's just trying to keep the tire on the road and absorbing energy over bumps and curbs and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like, does that upset the platform? Does that help with the aerodynamics? And I think there are a couple different theories out there, but they kind of went in a different direction that way with compared to Red Bull and now VCARB, and same with McLaren. I believe McLaren's also running a pull rod suspension. So I found that quite interesting looking at the car, but it looks fast, and
it sure does.
But that's the thing when you look at some of these cars, when they look fast, sometimes they are really fast.
Yeah.
That's just the way. That's literally the way it works. So
I'm obsessed with the side pods, and the reason I'm obsessed with the side pods, if you're looking this on the screen, if you're listening, you know what a side pod is probably, but right beside the driver where it says Boss and then Aramco. What's interesting to me is how much more elongated they are this year. Mm-hmm. The one that was obviously a major thing with Mercedes, right? Is they had a side pod issue, or they believed was a side pod issue, but they
zero pod.
because they thought this is going to be it. And it was so much chunkier than what you see here and what you see on the Red Bull. I mean, that looks like it's just going to slice through air, which
does look. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
So I'm excited to see if they're able to do it, because I really think, the top 5 is, for the first time in what I can remember, the most competitive top 5 I think you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's Red Bull and they're in a league of their own, but then you've got Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, and Aston Martin. And if any of those teams I told you finished second or third, you wouldn't be surprised, right? And that's what, I mean, perhaps more surprised than others. If Aston Martin finishes second this year, wow, that'll be crazy. But what are you seeing on the front here, Tim, on the nose?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that Dan Fallows had pointed out is the front wing. They've done a lot of design over the nose and the front wing. With that was something he was very quick to point out. The side pod inlets as well. So if you travel up the nose all the way to the top where the halo is, and you just look to the left or the right, you'll see these big inlets. It's above the it's below the Boss mirrors. Yeah. And so that actually, again, resembles what the RB19 was doing as well. I mean, there are certain aspects of this, aside from the suspension, that really do add and resemble the RB19. Again, like, I'm not an engineer. I just drove the things, but there are some components that I could see that are translatable to what Red Bull was doing last year, and I'm assuming it's just going to be a small evolution for them this season as well. But I think this car is going to be competitive, dude. Like, I really do. I really think it's going to be good.
The more teams that are competitive, the better it is. And it just takes one Max Verstappen mistake, which he doesn't often make, to open that field right up. And, 100%. And honestly, maybe it doesn't even take a mistake this year. Maybe sometimes there's going to be cars that are faster than Red Bull. Imagine that. Yeah. I do want to talk about VCARB a little bit here, Tim, and I'll let you bring them up. But, from a fan's perspective, like, all we have gotten is in the carbon fiber era is carbon fiber. We've gotten a lot of black on these cars. They're starting to look too similar in a lot of people's minds. But there's 2 that have stood out so far for looking like their teams. Aston Martin, one of them, and then the VCARB, which looks like a throwback to Toro Rosso, which people are pumped about. I see. Obviously, the colors are cool. It's going to be cool seeing Daniel Ricciardo, for anybody who watched him come up through Toro Rosso, 12 years ago. What do you see on this car, Tim? And do you think they can get out of the basement this year? Because it was a really disappointing last year. No,
it was. I would say this team is going to be an interesting, very interesting one to follow. Only because one, obviously, I mean, how many components? Like, how much did they get from the RB19? I mean, obviously, they're the junior team to the big team in Red Bull. And it's kind of like, okay, well, we know that they can share some components, but they can't share everything. And like, one of the things that Zach Brown has been very adamant about is just how much RB19 DNA is in this VCARB car. Because, if we go back to, do you remember in 2020 when, Racing Point, essentially came out with like this carbon copy Mercedes, I believe it was like a carbon copy of the W10 or the W11.
It was the COVID year.
Yeah,
COVID year,
and essentially their car was like almost a carbon copy of the 2019 winning Mercedes car, and that car was extremely competitive, and that team was very competitive throughout that season, and it turned into a huge thing, and it ended up just being the brake ducts that were illegal, that they didn't get that information. Like, they didn't really build that themselves. It wasn't something they actually came up with. For this, it's, the FIA, I think, is going to be really pressured to take a closer look at this car. I did ask Mike Crack about that during our sit-down interview with him on Sunday morning. It's kind of like, how much of I kind of asked him, like, how important is it for teams now to build their cars from scratch instead of getting components from other teams? Because if I'm not mistaken, VCARB, the front suspension and the rear suspension on this car is from the RB19. Like, that is something that they did share. Now, but what else on here is shared, right? How much of it? And that's going to be the issue. And how competitive is this team going to be? Daniel Ricciardo was extremely confident. He was talking a lot about top fives and could eventually lead to a podium at some point, potentially. So I think they're very confident in what they have. I don't know, Adam. It's this car, I think, could be a little controversial eventually. I mean, we'll have to wait and see.
I like the controversy. I love
everybody does, man. Everybody does.
We love when the technical directors and the team principals get mad at each other and start taking snipes in the press. But and listen, Tim, I'm a McLaren fan through and through, so I'm not. I'm completely biased on this one. But am I the only one that doesn't really have too much of a problem with these two teams sharing data? Like at the end of the day, AlphaTauri last year were one of the worst teams on the grid. Mm-hmm. And I want teams to be more competitive. They're owned by the same company. I don't understand really, like if this would never happen, but let's say Ferrari said to Aston Martin, guys, just because I like you, I'm going to give you this information. Not that they ever would. But I don't see I'm not really sure I see the issue, because if FIA or if the FIA is going to allow two teams to be owned by the same owner, and one is clearly the junior partner, the junior team, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to make them at least a little bit more competitive. And it's better for the sport, because like AlphaTauri were a non-factor last year.
But I mean,
at least towards at the beginning, towards the end.
Yeah, towards the end they were competitive. Yeah. Here's my issue with it though. When you look at a team like, I mean, Andretti, who wants to get into Formula One, mm-hmm. who's willing to build their own car. Yep. And then you've got the likes of like Haas, who takes a lot of its components from Ferrari. Now again, I'm not sure how much of those components they get. And then you've got this, and it does really resemble last year's RB19. Now, again, I'm not sitting here saying that this thing is an RB19. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like how many components should teams be allowed to get off of other teams? Right. Right, because there are some teams that get the rear suspension from Mercedes and the gearbox, and Aston Martin's one of those teams that gets those things as well.
I think McLaren is too, aren't they?
Yes, I'm not sure about rear suspension.
Power unit, obviously.
Power unit for sure, but then you've got Williams again. They're getting rear suspension, I believe, gearbox as well, engine. But again, they have to design around that, mm-hmm. and that could also lead to a lot of issues by doing so. Your aerodynamicists can't go the directions that they want to go, because they have to basically, bend over to suit what is at the rear of the car. So for a team like VCARB, that Aston Martin car the Racing Point car from 2020, I mean, could this be something? So, I mean, Zach Brown was pretty upset about all this stuff, like, during the winter break, and
mm-hmm. I saw him on some podcasts saying that. I'm sure he'd just light me up for what I just said, but like, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, I'd love to. I'm sure there are arguments, and I would listen to all of them. I'm like, I don't know. I don't want there to be. I want the whole point of the regulations is parity, right?
Yeah, you want teams to be able to build their own cars, right? Like,
oh, okay,
you know what I mean? Like, you got to build your own cars, and if you're not going to build your own cars, then why not just have a stock chassis that everybody gets, like IndyCar, and like, let's just go racing. What are we doing here, right? It's like you've got other teams that, they're investing, they're putting a lot of money behind what they're doing, so they can get further up the grid, get higher up into constructor standings, win that money. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, if a team is not going to totally build their cars straight from scratch, mm-hmm. and then all of a sudden, they get some really great components, and then all of a sudden they rocket up the charts. If you're like a team like McLaren, I'd be pissed, because like you've spent so much money investing and like all of this time, and then you're losing prize money because of it. And so I can see
that makes sense.
You know what I mean? Like, I can see it from a couple different angles.
Financially, the most, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think also like when Red Bull bought up this team and titled it, Toro Rosso, like they were kind of doing F1 a favor at the time, right? Trying to keep more cars on the grid. Mm-hmm. And now you've gotten to the time where, this team is probably worth a lot of money, Adam. Like,
yeah,
like you could sell this team for close to $1 billion, if not $1 billion. Mm-hmm. And so I also think like, okay, well, let's get this team really competitive. This is what I would do. I'd be like, let's get this team really competitive. Let's see how high up they can finish in whatever season. So 2024. And then let's see how much we can sell them for. See how much we can make back, because then they'd be really, really competitive and their value would be really high. And that's what I would do. I would do that if I owned them. I would.
I like that. Well, you know what, Tim? Maybe one day you'll be lucky enough. Now, we should wrap up. If we're talking Red Bull, we should talk about the fact that Christian Horner did apparently have his. People are calling it a hearing, but I think it was more like a meeting with a lawyer who was investigating, who was outside of the Red Bull group, who was conducting an investigation. What we keep hearing, and again, none of this is verifiable, is he's being accused of coercive behavior by a female employee, at least one, maybe two, and maybe a male and a female. We're not sure. But he did speak from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it's interesting this morning, Tim, because it's ESPN is reporting that their verdict is expected this coming week. Nate Saunders is reporting as late as Friday that we're expecting to hear something this week, which might coincide with their car launch, which is pretty crazy. Have you heard anything? Are there any updates as of February 12th at 10:15 in the morning?
Yeah, there really isn't a lot on this one that we know of. There are certain insiders that probably know a bit more. At the end of the day, some of the guys I was talking to, like they feel that they may not get a decision until we get the testing. Mm-hmm. So that could be not this week, but the week after. So it's really up in the air at this moment. If Nate is reporting that, then he's definitely hearing something. I haven't heard that, but Nate could be on something for sure. I guess it'll be interesting to see. Adam, like you said, meeting with the barristers for a lengthy time on Friday, and still no information kind of coming out about what is actually going on here. So,
which is probably for the best.
To wait and see.
It's better that we know less at this point, honestly. But yeah, it is a wait and see approach. It should be an interesting week with Red Bull, and an interesting week for you, sir. Getting packed up and ready to go to Bahrain. Lots going on. So we'll be catching up with you probably later this week, and then obviously next week you're going to be fully tanned Tim Hauraney. I love that. I love that.
Buddy, I don't tan, I burn.
What a nice crispy Tim.
I burn, man. I'm gonna have to put like so much sunscreen on just because this thing will look like a tomato.
Just zinc all over your face. Like,
like dude.
Mark Zuckerberg at the beach.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Well, listen, you know what, Tim? I'm very excited for you. I think it's going to be an exciting week. Yeah. We get testing, woohoo, very soon.
Yeah. We have more car launches this week too, Adam. We got Ferrari.
Ferrari tomorrow, right?
Yeah, we have Mercedes Wednesday. You got McLaren. Going to get to see their car on Wednesday as well. You got to be excited for that, Adam. McLaren.
Dude, I'm always excited.
Right? And then then we get Red Bull on Thursday, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see the actual McLaren car. Like, because we saw the livery launch, but I want to see the car.
Yeah, me too.
I want to see what they've done.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, 100%. Buddy, thanks very much for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it. That is Adam Wylde from SDPN. You can get him on social media at Adam Wylde. I'm Tim Hauraney. You can get me on social media at Tim Hauraney. You've been watching Nailing the Apex. If you want more Nailing the Apex, you can get on YouTube. You can get past episodes also on our podcast as well. We'll be back on Thursday with more. Until then, we'll talk to you all later.